Hello, hello, everyone. This is Coach Powell. Welcome to Inside the Business Mind. We have got a super special guest for you today. Mr. Daren Shumate of Shumate Engineering, the principal of Shumate Engineering, is going to be here today talking to us about all of the wonderful things that are going on in the world of data centers. Now, those of you who know me know that I always bring the high-powered guests with the great ideas and the ingenuity and clear points of view that you can understand and hear and work through. And I'm excited today to talk to Daren about all the things that are happening in the data center universe. This show is like all of the shows are brought to you by the wonderful brothers of Phi Beta Sigma Theta Tau Sigma chapter here in Northern Virginia, and all of my clients and contacts that make this possible, make it possible for me to do these interviews, to create opportunities for entrepreneurs and business leaders to showcase and spotlight talent. Talent that you can use, talent that you can get in touch with, talent that you can appreciate in anything that you do. And so if you know somebody who's eligible, you think is a powerful person and you want to have them interviewed here on Inside the Business Mind, reach out to me. All of my information is scrolling across the bottom of the screen, easy to contact, and it's going to be a fantastic time. So sharpen your pencils and get focused because we're going to talk about now one of the most important aspects of the future technology that we're using right now. Data centers are important for all that we will be doing in the future. They're important. They're vital to our collective intelligence. They're vital for us sharing information. They're vital for us storing and retrieving that information that we're sharing in a beautiful way. And it's important as AI becomes more popular, we need more high-powered data centers. As semiconductors come back and manufacturing comes back to America, we need more high-powered data centers. These are going to be things that we're dependent on in order for us to move forward, create the infrastructure we need to create in the country. And they're great opportunities for people, not as much as employment, but a lot for really in terms of tax abatement and different things like that for improving municipalities and the tax bases there. So having said all of that, I'm going to bring to you a kingpin, a gentleman who by far, is one of the greatest and most intelligent individuals we have in the data center community, helping to build and helping create the MEP, the expert, the genius of Shumate Engineering and Shumate Creative. I'd like to introduce my friend, my one of my best clients and good quality community service types of people, Mr. Daren Shumate. Daren, welcome to Inside the Business Mind.
Thank you so much, Barbara. That was all those things you said was very nice. I appreciate it.
So tell us about yourself, Daren. How long you been in business? What's the specialty? What are the ideas and niche market for Shumate Engineering?
So Shumate Engineering has been around for a little over 4 years. It's something that I've always wanted to do. I've worked at several firms around town. MEP Engineering, I'm an electrical engineer, PE. Worked around town for about 36 years in the DC area, but in COVID, it looked like it was a good idea for me to start my own firm, so I started Shumate Engineering. We've grown from me in the basement in 2020 to 14 people and growing in Tyson's Corner, really building upon my experience in the data center design world. We design the mechanical electrical systems for very large data centers. As I was starting the firm, was approached by my former boss from RTKL, Steve Spinazzola, who called me and said, "Hey, why don't we put the band back together?" And Steve joined me in the fall of 2020, and we now have one hyperscale data center under construction in Ashburn, and we've got 2 more in design right now that are also very large data centers. And yeah, we look forward to enjoying the big growth that's in front of us. The common wisdom now, McKinsey had a report that was out this spring that the amount of data center space that's been built from the beginning of time to now is going to double in the next 7 years. So there are significant challenges in design and efficiency in data centers that have now become critical as we try to build these data centers and then try to get them powered, because the utilities are strained. The power utilities are strained, getting these things powered.
That once brings me to a question that I really like to ask you. When you say a hyperscale data center, what is that and why is that important?
That's a great question. I mean, when I started designing data centers 25 years ago, 4 or 5 megawatts was considered a pretty big data center. And then 10, 12 years ago, 12 megawatts was considered a pretty big data center. Now you have data center buildings with one building with 100 megawatts of IT load, not counting the mechanical load to cool it, and being deployed in campuses of 10 buildings of 100 megawatts for 1,000 megawatts or a gigawatt. So hyperscale means very, very, very big. The drivers of the industry are the hyperscalers, the so-called hyperscalers, which are, it's pretty easy to figure them out. It's Amazon, Facebook, Microsoft, Google, Facebook, or Facebook. I said Facebook already. Apple, and a few others. And when they deploy a data center, they deploy it at very large scale. And basically, like you said in your introduction, this is driven by the market. Everything we do, there's not one part of our lives that is not impacted by something that is an application or a program or code that is not in a data center. The heart of everything that we do or need to get access to through these devices, and then also even the computers we're on now, the network that we're using to talk right now, Marvin, are supported by data centers, and it's growing exponentially.
That is incredible. You mentioned earlier that the study showed that the data center universe is going to be doubling in the next 7 years. And you and I sat on boards, and we've sat on planning commissions and all that kind of good stuff in the past. And I'm always concerned that when we sort of build something for a future pace, right? That we do it in a way, whether it's roads or bridges or any kind of infrastructure, that we do it in a way that's not just going to just meet the capacity that we need, but kind of jump over the capacity that we need just so that we're going to be good, even maybe 20, 30 years out. What are your thoughts on that? Do you think we should overshoot the runway a little bit, or should we, try to peel back, because I know whatever the speed of our devices and things like that are all tied into, what the real need is going to be. And we don't know where AI is going to go. We just don't know. We know it's going to be big. There's no way to know how it itself is going to improve itself and create the need for, more power in that regard. What are your thoughts on that?
Well, so I mean that's a great question. I mean, a great local example would be schools. In my neighborhood, they built a new elementary school. They updated the elementary school. They updated the junior high in my neighborhood, and within 2 years of the school being done, they're bringing in trailers. So you've got to find the right balance on building ahead and building smart and using your budgets with intelligence. In data centers, the reality is the demand is outpacing the ability of the industry to build data centers, and the challenges are finding land where you can where a locality will allow you to build a data center where you're unencumbered by, or not unencumbered is not the fair word. And of course, I was on the planning commission at Fairfax County, where the zoning and planning laws and regulations allow you to efficiently and quickly build a data center, and power availability. It's well known in Loudoun County that Dominion has run out of supply and transmission. So Dominion is scrambling now to catch up with the demand. There are a handful of data centers that are being built now on the promise of power coming in the next couple of years. So the reality is, going back to your question, should we build ahead? I think to a certain level, we'd like to be able to build ahead, but it's really driven by capital cost, because a data center developer is not going to want to build out a complete building, without a tenant, without the demand. So it's finding that right balance. But like I said, the big challenge now is finding the land and the power, and then subsequent to that is supply chain. These data centers take a lot of big mechanical and big electrical equipment. There are, air-cooled chillers up on the roof, or you've got adiabatic coolers, or you have generators or big switchgear, UPS units, etc. There are, like I said, if you're doubling the capacity in 7 years, there's a huge strain on the supply of the manufacturing and supply and delivery of that equipment. I mean, it's not unusual to say have a promised delivery of, say, generators in, as an example, in January, and then they come back and say, hey, we are not able to do that. We can get it to you in March. And that, messes with the whole schedule. So that's the big challenge right now. And in fact, that actually informs our design and our approach to design. We have a client right now where we're actually looking at a different generator configuration to be able to specify generators that are available within a year, as opposed to generators that are available within 2 or 3 years, 2 or 2.5 years.
That brings me to a really wonderful thought, because I know it's a more complicated process than most board leaders of organizations, municipalities, states, and so on and so forth are really equipped to handle, in terms of where they are. It's like almost every nonprofit board you ever think about, right? It's not really full of experts in the field but they might be endeavoring to create some wonderful opportunities for social improvements. And so usually the board is full of people who, are professionals in what they do, but not necessarily professionals in the thing that the organization stands for. And it's no different that I see now for commissions for organizations, or boards for, municipalities or counties, so to speak. And they're doing the best they can, it seems like, with what they know, but they're highly driven by the voters. They're highly driven by the populace. And they end up creating and kind of working through a lot of myths that are out there about data centers and probably everything else. And I was so glad when you were appointed to our board for planning and planning commission for Fairfax County, because I know, data centers are important, and they're going to be important. There's no getting out of the responsibility and the duty. I think all of our leaders have to really consider and think about those things, so that we can do the things we like, because we can't do this, like you said, our lives are going to be considerably, damaged in a way that I'm not sure that we're prepared to accept. It's like, wait a minute, 10G is possible, but we can't do it. It's like, oh, why can't we do it? That's not Americans don't have a palate for not being able to do what they want when they want it, which is crazy. Could you dispel some of the myths that are out there? Because I see you've been myth busting now for at least 2 or 3 years. I've been watching you on the news and reading articles, and where you've suggested, and you come at them, hard and heavy with true expertise. What are some of the biggest myths out there now that we can dispel for anybody who's watching this, and they could just, really take a hold of what's true and what's not true? What can you tell us about some of the myths that are out there right now?
So thanks for the question. That's a great question, and I think that goes aligned with when I say you what makes a particular potential site for data center viable is the zoning and planning process. And again, with my experience at Fairfax, on the Fairfax County Planning Commission, where we actually had a large data center special exception case in Chantilly that came before us, and also one in my district, Mason District, that is being developed by Wright, meaning that it doesn't need a special exception, that the real critical thing about the regulatory, the planning and zoning aspect is, the citizens do deserve a voice. The stakeholders do deserve a voice, and that's what the whole planning process is all about. So having participated as a planning commissioner in this process, there's a handful of issues that always come up, and questions that are asked, or concerns that are brought up, and some actually are valid concerns that do need to be addressed and can be addressed, and others are really not issues. And I know this from the Planning Commission, because we had the one special exception case, and then we also went through the process of updating the zoning modification known as ZMod, and data centers were a big aspect of the reason that had been overturned by the Supreme Court of Virginia. So getting to the myths, there's concern about pollution, that a data center is a building that pollutes more than other buildings, and of course that's driven by this is a myth. The myth that cooling tower water, wastewater, is being dumped straight into the water supply, and there's a couple myths to bust there. First of all, in 2024, very few, if any, data centers are using traditional cooling towers that would require a blowdown cycle that would introduce water that might have a higher concentration of chemicals and sludge, etc. So that is a design that's not being used. And if it were, and this is every office building in DC and in the country that has a cooling tower, you treat the water. The water is never dumped to the sewer raw. It is always treated and filtered and taken care of. So that's a myth. The other portion, I've lost my train of thought. The other portion of that is, like I said, the vogue now, the design standard now is air-cooled chillers, which is a completely electrical play. It means there's no water at all. There's no water being evaporated at all. It's all done through refrigeration cycle and air being blown over coils in the data center. So the water runoff is not an issue. Stormwater runoff, I've seen this a few times, both in some written comment to articles and in public hearings, that there's a worry about rain falling on the property. And to a project, the rainwater is a huge issue. And if you've seen any planning commission meetings, that is a huge issue on every project, no matter what it is making sure that we are not dumping too much rainwater into the system. Because when you have big rain events in Northern Virginia, you have flash flooding. So you have a lot of methods to keep that rainwater on site. And I'll give you an example. This 42 megawatt data center that we're overseeing the construction of right now, that we designed, is a 3-story building on a small lot. And because we were taking up green space, we actually have a green roof. There's actually soil and plants on the roof to take up the green space that was taken away because of the size of the building on the lot. And what does that mean? That means that rainwater that falls will be absorbed by the soil and the plants and never make it to the sanitary sewer. So the storm sewer. And so we are hyper focused on that issue. Another issue is the diesel generators. The standard design today is that these data centers are backed up by diesel generator. Diesel is the preferred fuel and generator type because they're very, very reliable. They start very quickly and produce tons and tons of power. We're deploying, on any given building, 20 to 30 or 40, depending on the size of the building, 2.5, 3 megawatt generators. And the design standard now is a belly tank, meaning the generator sits on top of a tank. They're typically 40 feet long, 12 feet wide or 45 feet long, 12 feet wide, and 3 or 4 feet deep, depending on how many hours of runtime you need. And they're in double-walled tanks with leak sensors between the walls, meaning that the chances of a fuel spill from a tank is virtually nil. And the fuel fill system is equally well designed and regulated not to have fuel spills. So a fuel spill is just virtually non-existent in a data center. In fact, it was deemed not enough of an issue that when Fairfax County when the Fairfax County proposed new data center specific planning zoning regulations, that fuel was not considered an issue. I've heard some concerns about EMF, electromagnetic field, or electromagnetic force. I mean, this is a very common concern around any sort of new big electrical infrastructure, whether it's a substation or a transmission line or a cell tower. The reality is that none of this equipment generates radioactive energy or electrical energy at a high enough capacity to actually impact the matter, to impact electrons in atoms. It doesn't happen. In fact, you will experience more electromagnetic flux sitting on the metro than you will driving by a data center or even being in a data center. So EMF is really not an issue. The one issue that I think is the one that has some merit, and that is noise. These buildings have air conditioning systems that are on all the time, day and night, all year round, and they do make noise. But again, and design engineers are hyper focused on meeting or exceeding county ordinances. And the good news is it is possible to design sound attenuation systems to address that concern. Absolutely legitimate concern. If you live close to one of these buildings, that would be something that would be legitimate. But we can design around that, and we will never design. And any engineer would tell you this: they would not design a data center without consulting an acoustical consultant who gives them clear direction on how to design it so it doesn't make the noise. The follow-up on that is, I know Fairfax County's new regulation requires, and I'm going to mess this up, I think that any equipment that produces noise, like mechanical equipment, has to be either 200 or 300 feet away from I think the neighbor's property line. So the idea is sound distance is your friend. The farther away something is, that sounds like it's obvious, but it's if it's twice, it's the inverse of the square of the inverse, or inverse of the square, meaning if it's twice as far away, it's 1/4 of the noise. So those are like the big ones. I mean, you've come up on your screen now, so you want to. I went for a long time there. So you have a question you want to ask?
I do. First of all, I'm glad you're on it. I'm glad people like you are there. I wish there were more on these planning and zoning commissions all over the country, so that we can bring some real expertise to bear, and these boards of supervisors and these state officials can make some informed decisions, instead of going with the shoot from the hip decisions. Like, for instance, why not solar power? I'm sure you get that question all the time, which is like, why can't we just have it all? Why can't it all just be solar?
Yeah, that question's come up. I've been on panels when that's come up, and the challenge with solar and the challenge with wind is, and I'm a big proponent of both. I drive an electric car, although I don't have solar panels on my house. The challenge with solar is, and a visualization is critical. So in order to have enough solar power for 100 megawatts, you need about 900 acres. 900 acres, and again, I grew up in a small town in Kansas where you gauge and measure land by sections. A section of land is 1 mile by 1 mile, and it's 640 acres. So basically, this is a section and a half of land. So it's 1.5 mile by 1 mile of solar to produce enough power for 100 megawatt data centers. So I think the environmental impact of covering a mile and 1.5 square miles is just not feasible from a wind standpoint. Dominion Power now has, I think it's a 700 or 800 megawatt wind farm being planned off of Virginia Beach. I know there's these big landing stations in Portsmouth before the power would come in. 800 megawatts would be 3/4 of one Facebook campus. So that's, when Facebook is building, they're building 1,000 megawatts. So that wind farm wouldn't even do one Facebook campus, for example. So it's a challenge. Obviously we need that. What's happening now is, and I was talking with a good friend of mine who's a data center developer, and he knew of a deal in Atlanta that was buying power from a power company in Arkansas, and I don't have the details on this, but in order to supply the power to this new data center, they were firing up a mothballed coal-fired plant. Well, I mean, that's like a terrible idea. I mean, it's just a terrible idea, but the demand is driven by these IT loads that support everything that we're doing. So the real story there is, how can we be smart about efficiently using the power that we're generating, so we reduce the demand or the need for the dirty energy like coal or natural gas. And of course, we're dependent upon natural gas now. Nuclear is a great option. I think they're firing up 3 Mile Island for Microsoft. So there are some interesting options. Building a new nuclear power plant, I think if you wanted to do that now, it would take many years. So it's not an immediate option. One option you're seeing now and has been deployed by several developers is on-site generation with natural gas, whether it's turbine generators or other systems, but you're actually getting a big gas connection and you're generating power on site, and then hopefully doing either cogeneration or trigeneration, where you're taking some of that heat and either making chilled water or heating. Not much heating need in a data center.
Yeah, you got to cool that stuff off. You don't have to heat it. That's for sure. This is a great conversation. I want to pivot the conversation now and talk about Shumate. Your firm is one of the better firms when it comes to dealing with data center development and design. Where do you see the future of Shumate? If you had to look out and say, okay, here's where I think we're going, and here's how I think we're going to be playing, where's Shumate going to help rescue the rest of us from ourselves?
You mentioned in the introduction Shumate Creative. We don't quite have that branded yet. But like I said, in the fall of 2020, I was approached by Steve Spinazzola. Steve was my boss at RTKL, and one of the things that I really liked when I went to RTKL was that I knew that Steve was an inventor, had come up with this patent and product called Tower of Cool. And before I was at RTKL, we kind of made fun of Steve, but when I dug into it, it really made a lot of sense. And what it was doing was it was separating the cooling air from the heat rejection air in a rack. And Steve was actually able to get, I think it was 6 patents on that. Well, that has evolved into hot aisle containment, which is the standard design of data centers, meaning you're flooding a room with cooling air that finds its way in with the pressure from the fans and the pressure in the space into and through the computers, up and out the back of the computers into a contained aisle, the hot aisle containment. and it gets back to the units, whether it's computer air handling units or fan walls, and that is all based upon what Steve presented at 7x24 in, I think it was 2000, 2001, where he was heckled off the stage. Well, fast forward to 2020, Steve joined Shumate Engineering, and Steve is an inventor and a tinkerer and a loves to dive into the psychrometric chart, and he has come up with what we're calling hybrid dry adiabatic cooling. And we are in our models. We've got one design underway for this, and we are showing in our models a PUE of 1.07, 1.08. What does that mean? Power utilization effectiveness. That means how much power coming to your data center is being used for cooling. I was reading a website yesterday of a data center company, and they were talking about their PUE was 1.4. Well, that means for every 100 megawatts of IT load, you're spending yet another 40 megawatts on cooling. If our design were deployed over that, instead of 40 megawatts, it would be 7.5 megawatts. What does that mean? You're saving a lot of money on electricity, or if you're buying that whole amount of power, you have more power available for revenue. So we think that this is really going to change the industry. As there are going to be significant electricity savings for cooling, and more electricity going to revenue. And when these hyperscalers are deploying at 1,000 megawatts at a time, that adds up fast. And even at a price of 6 or 7 cents per kilowatt hour, that saves a boatload of money. So that, and on the utility side, that means fewer or less power needs to be generated or transmitted for inefficient, ineffective cooling. We think it's win-win, and we're looking forward to sharing this more.
So what in your mind, if any, are there any obstacles that could keep this from really blowing up and going in the direction where you see it should go?
That's a good question as well. In order to achieve these kinds of efficiencies, we're going to be relying on a water-based or liquid-based heat transfer mechanism. What does that mean? It can be kind of weird if you're not familiar with this, but there are actually data centers that use oil as a it's a non-conductive oil in a tub, and you put your servers in the oil, and the oil takes the heat out of the servers into the oil, and you have a heat exchanger that takes the heat out of the oil to a condenser water loop, or in our case, it's a chilled water loop. And right now, the vast majority of data centers are air-based, meaning they're computers in racks like you would see in any photo of a data center. So that's the big shift. But we know of hyperscalers that are deploying this. We actually are involved with the project in Atlanta for one of the hyperscalers where they're deploying this, and especially with the high loads of AI, we think this is going to become the norm. But that's the switch. If we try to sell this now, the full air, we're not going to get the full PUE. The good news about this HDAC design is it also provides 90-degree air for the water cooled, and it provides 73-degree air in the same loop. So you could start out with a building being all air, and you can transition it to all or mostly liquid without changing any equipment. So, like I said, we think it's a great solution.
I think it's a great solution too, and you and I can geek out on this all day long, because it's super exciting to be able to see what you guys were able to do there. Instinctually, okay, we recognize that there may be some differences in considering how we're going to do the watering of the water parts of the cooling systems. Instinctively, where do you think is that the better solutions are going to be? Are we talking about being close to water resources, or lakes or rivers, or what are we talking about here in order to create that opportunity?
Well, so when I say water based, I'm talking about using liquid to cool the server. It's not actually having to take more water necessarily. Now, our system does use water. It evaporates water, but it only evaporates water at exterior temperatures over 85 degrees, which is about 10% of the year. So compared to a 100% cooling tower solution, it is, a fraction of the water. We can also argue that, air-cooled chillers are in vogue, especially in Loudoun County. They're worried about water consumption, but the reality is the power plant that is producing that power 100 miles away is using water to cool the power plant. And based upon the losses of the generation, transmission, retransformation, you're wasting way more water by using an air-cooled chiller than by our system. So, like I said, we think it's going to have a big impact. We're trying to get out there on that.
This is so super exciting. I can imagine that in the next couple of years and months, you're going to be flying out to conferences all over the place, talking to people. You and Spinoza are going to be out there, doing the dance, making sure that you're doing everything you need to do. So
Well,
congratulations on that.
we presented, or Steve rather presented, teamed with our architect on this one project at the AFCOM, the World Data Center World in April in DC, and it was standing room only. It was a pretty engaged crowd, and we definitely think it's a big deal.
Absolutely, absolutely. I'm gonna see if I can't sneak in there and go with you next year. but that's a great conference, and I'm sure there's gonna be many more of opportunities for you guys out there. If anybody wants to get in contact with Steve and bring him and Daren out to one of your conferences or give you some information about what's going on with them, I want you to put your information in the chat, Daren, so I can share it with everybody, and contact information if possible. And I'm going to sit you backstage while we close out the show. So don't go anywhere. We got some other things to talk about. And thank you so much for coming on board, for being here today.
This is great, Marvin. I appreciate it. Like Marvin said, I'm his client. He's my client. Good guy. Pay attention to what he says. He knows what he's talking about.
I thank you so much for the compliment. All right, you just hang out backstage and I'll be right with you. Okay, ladies and gentlemen, just like I've told you, just like I promised you, genius is all we deal with here at Inside the Business Mind. This is a show that was put together by my friend Daren Marcourt and I on the roundtable. If we first started realizing that, the professionals that are out there don't often get a voice. They don't get often an opportunity to come before you and share their ideas in a way that are meaningful so that you can see exactly their impact in the community at large and what they do. And like, you don't know what's going on in the legal offices and the architects' offices and the engineering offices and all of the various types of professions that are out there. And we like to bring them to the forefront so that you can see them, so that you can participate and grow with them. This is Inside the Business Mind with Coach Powell, and I love hanging out with you guys. Thank you so very much, and I hope you enjoyed the show. My contact information is below. Daren's going to put his contact information in the show notes, so we'll definitely make sure that you get in contact with him if you need to do so. And we're thankful for your attention. Thank you so much, and you will have a lovely time at whatever's going on in your life at this time. But this show is going to be amazing, so thank you for participating.